I mean, I think agency is a few things, right? I think embedded in the word agency is the word choice, right? And we often talk about in education, like how do kids growing up being able to make the right choices and the choice to be able to do what they want, right? Like it's embedded in, lots of visions and lots of school visions, but embedded in the word choice is it's a loaded word, right? You know, do I have the capabilities to be able to make a choice, right? Do I have the right value system to be able to make a choice?
Welcome to Will Talks. Today, I have an incredible gentleman with me. His name is Sandeep Rai. Sandeep Rai is the founder of The Circle, and you're going to learn more about this amazing initiative called The Circle. Prior to Circle, he was with the Teach for India, where he almost scaled up Teach for India's services and operations from one city to more than 9 cities across India. So there's going to be so much learning, and there's going to be so much potential discussions that are going to really help you as a school leader or a school entrepreneur or someone who's just looking at education as an ecosystem in which you feel that you can bloom and you can contribute and make a better India. Sandeep, thank you so much for doing this today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Amazing. Is there anything you'd like to share for the purpose of this podcast about your background or where you're from or anything that you've done in your past?
Yeah. I mean, I was born and raised in the US. Um, Grew up essentially thinking that I would go into medicine. And a couple months away before that decision, I had a bit of an epiphany. Um, and I realized that I was doing that for what felt like, all of the wrong reasons. And so I decided to teach. And I joined Teach for America. I spent, 2 years teaching in a classroom that fundamentally changed my life. Was probably to this day the hardest 2 years of my life. And I say that, 17 years later after having done a number of different things, but those 2 years were challenging, but they taught me so much, and I think they cemented this belief that, education really has the power to be game changing for kids. Um, and I think it was through those 2 years that I decided like this is what I would be doing probably for the rest of my life. Shortly after that, jumped on a plane, flew to India, joined Shaheen to try to basically help, get Teach for India off the ground. Thought I'd be doing that for a year, and thought I would go back to the US. And so my plan was to come spend a year in India and then, head back to the US. And then I just realized also that this was something that I wanted to be fighting for. And here I am today, 15, 16 years later. Yeah.
Wow. When you say that it was really hard for you in that classroom being a teacher, what do you really
Yeah.
mean? Like what does hard mean? Was it just because that was the first time you were doing something new or you were really young or you didn't know what to do? Or was it really hard? Like what how hard is hard?
It was probably both. It was both of those. I mean, I think, look, we were a school that was ranked close to the bottom, right, of all the schools in Washington, on probably every parameter, right? Academics, safety. We had police officers patrolling the school quite often. Like, we had a high number of arrests of kids quite often. It was a school that, by every possible means, was just challenging. And it served, an area of Washington, D.C. that, was afflicted by, incredibly high poverty rates, by incredibly high violence rates. And all of that together meant that, what happens outside of the classroom, what happens outside of the school was inevitably making its way inside of the school, you know? And so my first year was spent, a lot of my time was just breaking up fights. We would have fights that would break out within the school, fights that would break out within the classroom. My first day in the classroom, like, I had a kid that was in the back of my classroom and I walk in and, I had these 35 eighth grade boys and they segregated according to girls and boys because I taught middle school. So I taught seventh and eighth grade science. And, I looked to the back of the classroom and I'm standing up and I had dressed up in a suit because, I was told that, if I dress up more formally, the kids will take me more seriously. And I'm like 20 years old. And I look to the back of the classroom and there's this kid and he's actually rolling dice on my floor. And the back of the classroom is probably that far away. And I look back and and there's this radio on my floor as well. And so I look back and I'm like, could you please, you know, stop rolling dice and come sit down? And, this kid, ignores me. And so I got a little bit firmer and I said it again. And I tried to like get my voice to be as firm as I could. And I straightened up my tie. And I said, could you please sit down? I need you to stop rolling the dice. And he looks up and he ignores me again. So I said it a third time, except this time I tried to like get a little bit louder. And this kid, well, he stands up and he gets in like football position, right? And he gets one leg in front of the other and comes charging at me. And that was my first day, right? A lot of that was, a lot of my year was spent like breaking up fights, trying to basically, work with the community and with a set of kids that, were afflicted by so much that surrounded them. And so, yeah, so it was tough in every possible means.
So I'm trying to still get my head
Yeah,
around
the story.
the word US
Yeah,
and poverty
yeah,
and
yeah,
classrooms that are unmanageable and children who don't respect teachers.
yeah,
The reason I'm saying this is because I think one of the things that one of the guests on my podcast before told me is what Indian teachers do not realize is how much automatic respect and compliance and discipline that children bring from within into their classrooms.
yeah,
Do you think that's true? Do you think that is something that we've probably taken for granted?
yeah. I mean, a lot of people have asked me, like, what are the differences that I see between the US system and the education system here? And look, I do think that levels of poverty are much deeper. There's no comparison, right?
In the US?
In India,
Oh, in
right?
India.
And,
Okay.
and it's much wider, right? So in the US, you're talking about, maybe 15, 20% of the population that you're working with, right?
Mm.
In India, you're talking about 70% plus, right? Of 1.4 billion. And so the numbers, the breadth of what we're working with in India is just, there's no comparison, right? Um, and yet you're right, right? Like I think that you don't experience levels of violence, you don't experience like much of that within a lot of Indian schools, right? I think there's a downside to that. I do think compliance levels are much higher. I do think part of what it's going to take for us to be able to grow in India is how do we basically move from a culture of compliance, right, to a culture of creation and a culture of autonomy, right? And I think that that's part of what we need to figure out how to shift. But you're right. The positive, there is an upside to that, which is that, you don't have a lot of those issues within the classroom. So
Which
yeah,
I think something that you said really, really connected. You said if what I heard is like if there's compliance, there's probably less creation, and there's probably less creation because there's probably less agency.
yeah,
What do you think is agency for students? And let's say in a school, a low cost affordable private school, 90% of the 300,000 low cost private affordable schools in India that charge less than maybe 15,000 rupees fees. What does agency look like? What do you mean agency? Like I know students who lie down on the floor in a supermarket and make sure that their parents buy what they want. I know students who have incredible amount of agency at home. A 3-year-old can bring a house down. What happens to that 3-year-old when that 3-year-old comes to school?
I mean, I think agency is a few things, right? I think embedded in the word agency is the word choice, right? And we often talk about in education, like how do kids growing up being able to make the right choices and the choice to be able to do what they want, right? Like it's embedded in, lots of visions and lots of school visions, but embedded in the word choice is it's a loaded word, right? It's, you know, do I have the capabilities to be able to make a choice? Right? Do I have the right value system to be able to make a choice? And when you break those down, well, do I have the right capabilities as well? If I'm deciding if I want to go to college or not go to college or which college I'm going to go to, is that actually determined because actually I don't have many choices? Or do I've done well enough in school and now it's actually my choice to make, right? Like embedded in choice is capability. It's also that I've done so well that I can actually do what I want. And that is a big part of agency that we don't actually talk about, right? So I do think part one is like, I've succeeded enough to where actually like I'm in control of my destiny to a degree, right? It is my choice to be able to make. But it's also like, do I have the critical thinking to be able to make that choice? Do I have the analytical skills to be able to make that choice, right? And then finally, it's do I have the value system to be able to make that choice? Am I making that based off of a set of values that feel like it's going to be good for me, but also good for the world around me? Right. And so I think agency is built upon this concept of choice. Right. And then it's also like the more traditional definition of agency that you actually hear talked about a lot today is not just capability and all of those things. It's, do I also feel like I've got, you know, a set of like, do I have the autonomy and the will to be able to then act on that? Do I feel confident enough to be able to say I am in control of my own decisions? Right. I
Hmm.
think all of those things are embedded in agency. And I think if I were to basically add to that a little bit, I would say when we move, we have the potential to make a shift from kids that are, you know, operating as high agents of themselves in control of their own destinies to kids that are actually building a better world, right? We can make that shift when it's not just agency. It's agency plus I am aware of the systemic issues around me. It's agency plus I care about solving the systemic issues around me. And then actually agency becomes not just I'm driving my own destiny, but I'm driving my own destiny and I'm really committed to serving others. I'm really committed to building a better India. I'm really committed to building a better world. And that's when I think you actually unlock
I love it. I love the fact that you break down agency into choice because that, as a school principal or a school leader, gives me the idea that I need to work on building more choice for children. I need to
yeah,
work on building more low stake opportunities for children where if they fail, it's like low stake failure. And when they walk out of the school, they start feeling very comfortable with their own levels of performance and competency, thus giving them the self image that they require to take the right choices or to make wise choices
yeah,
when things go bad.
yeah. And again, I think it's that. I think that's one part. I think that's a very important part of the equation that you mentioned. And I also think it's do I have the skills, knowledge, and capabilities when I'm ready to take that choice
Hmm.
to be able to actually make that choice, right?
Oh.
And so we often talk, am I capable? Like, am I ready? Do I actually, have a set of knowledge? And am I able to practice that for whatever grade? If that's at second grade, do I have a set of capabilities to be able to make that choice? If I'm in seventh grade, do I have the capabilities to be able to also make that choice?
Mm.
But are we preparing kids to also be able to do
So then, do you think like standardized testing and the school timetable of 9 periods in a week with 27 periods inside is an absolute choice killer?
that? That's a good question. I think that there's a lot that needs to change about like how we test for sure. I think I can see like how we've gotten into a system of standardized testing, right? Like policymakers across the world have been looking at how do you actually provide an equitable education for kids and right. And equity has really been at the heart of like a lot of policy decisions for the last 50, 60 years, ever since we, made decisions to democratize education, right? I think in the pursuit of standardization, I think we've lost a lot,
Mhm.
you know? And yeah.
When do you think we should focus on standardization? Maybe a school year is like really long. It's 13 years, 3 years of pre-primary, and then we have 10 years of school, and then we have got 2 years. Well, not based on the new NEP, but we have, let's say, 2 years of 11th and 12th standard before a child goes into an undergraduate program or a graduation, as they call it in India. So, where do you think we should start focusing on like exam testing? Do you think there are different pedagogical focuses that a school can have? What does a school timetable look like where choice is given, um, a little more significance and importance than
Yeah.
normal?
Yeah. This is a loaded question that I feel like could go on for many hours. But look, if I had to say the short of it, it would be like I think that we need to revamp how we test in India. And I think we need to fundamentally revamp how we test to one that is basically right now for most kids fully rooted in a lot of knowledge, right?
Mm.
Have I attained like a wide set of like, knowledge over the years? And am I able to basically go in and regurgitate that and just get tested on that to one that is basically more widely rooted in skills and competencies, right? So I think that's one shift that we need to be able to make. That would also, lead to much less rote. That would lead to much less memorization over time.
Mm.
But I think the second is like our assessments are trying to serve a lot of different purposes at once, right? So one is they're trying to actually test to see where kids have come. Two is they're trying to serve as a market signal, right, for colleges so that you're able to basically sift through that. And I think as a result of that, you've got this test that's basically this one all be all, which has basically turned it into this high stakes
Mm,
environment. But I think if we're able to maybe demarcate, separate some of that,
mm,
I think we may end up with some more creative solutions. Like, do you
mm.
need one big summative that's a one all be all, or could you actually have multiple formatives that actually are, a little bit more standardized and rooted in skills and
This
competencies?
is beautiful because when we have to build an assessment system that allows us to sift through or
Yeah.
sift through a lot of people, or we need to stack rate people because we need to find out like a market signal, that kind of event, that kind of, to me personally, indicates that whatever these people were doing or part of was probably not very efficient or effective. Do you feel schools, the way they are run today, need not be in India but across the world, school as a concept, do you think they're slightly inefficient, or they're, because every time I ask my daughter, what did you learn in school today, she can tell me everything in under 30 seconds. So I wonder, why did you take 7 hours? And when I talk to school leaders and school principals, when they're actually building the timetable, I ask them, why you build timetable in this way? And one of the things that they tell me is, we want to ensure that when a child comes to school, they learn, but we also want to ensure in the same breath that if a child was absent, they don't miss much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute, what are we optimizing for?
Yeah. I don't know if inefficient's the word that I would use, although I want to think about that a little bit. I think I would probably use just obsolete,
Mm.
you know? Like, I think that our schools were designed for an India that existed about 70, 75 years ago, you know? And India's changed, right? Like when you look at basically the India of the 1950s and the 1940s, when we started to go down this road of how do you democratize, right? Education. And you look at the India today of, 2023, like, and you think about the fact that, today's young people, right? Somebody who's 5, 6 years old that's just entering the school system is most likely going to see the beginning of the 22nd century, right?
Yeah.
And yet we're still designing schools for a 20th century world, right? And I think that like it just feels illogical, right? And so India's changed, right? The workforce has changed, the world has changed. And I say this as somebody who's been into schools quite a lot, right? Except for the pandemic, probably like once a week, right? For most of the last, 15 years that I've been in India, like our schools have kind of stayed the same, you know?
Mm.
They haven't really evolved that much. And so I think the questions that we need to be grappling with is, well, how is India changing? And how is the workforce changing? And how is the world changing? And how do our schools need to be evolving to be able to keep up with that, right?
Mm.
And our schools were, schools as a concept were built to be stable institutions. And there's a good thing in that, right? They're kind of impermeable to change in some ways. But there's a bad to that as well, because as society evolves, as the world evolves, like our schools don't really keep up with. Yeah. So
I understand what you're saying. I think what I'm getting is, over the next 200 years, schools are definitely going to change,
yeah,
and it's going to reorient itself for the world that it has created or the world that it needs to serve. And the collateral damage seems to be the millions of kids who are in school today,
yeah,
and that, I think, is more heart wrenching for me, right? Because I
yeah,
start feeling like, hey man, if things are going to go and become like, as my grandmother said, this too shall pass, if that's the way it's going to be, but what about the collateral damage that we're making to, for the kids who really need us the most, right?
yeah,
So in my discussions with many school leaders, I've seen responsibility seems to be a big problem. Like when I talk to school leaders and school principals, many of them say we just need to prepare kids to ensure that they crack the exam, get into a college. Once they get into a college, they'll get into some other college. Once they get into that, they'll get their first job. And when they get their first job, whatever organization hired them will train them for the job.
yeah,
So it almost feels like people are not taking responsibility. I always wanted to throw this question at someone who's potential, like a school leader. If I had to tell you that you are a school leader of a school in which the kids are going to get out after 12th standard and not go to college, I don't mean
yeah,
that way,
yeah,
but they have the skills and the competencies ready to get a job right now, school for
yeah,
life, right? Would How does that even sound?
yeah. Graduating with the absence of college, right? Is what you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah,
Then suddenly I have to take responsibility of getting.
yeah, yeah. No, I love it. I mean, to your earlier point before I answer that directly, right? Like I think that's why I think I've grown to believe that this is not just an implementation issue, right? So oftentimes what we hear in India is like, we have all of the right thoughts in place, we have the right policies in place, but we're not able to implement it well. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? I do think we have a lot of implementation breakdowns in education today, right? But I also think it's a design issue. And I think your story of the principal, right, or the school leaders that you talk to point to why it's a design issue, right? Because we're all working in this one design framework of schools as it's currently existed. And I think like until we're able to shift how schools are designed, we're not going to shift who takes responsibility. We're not going to shift basically how people are implementing that. And so I think we need to take a couple of steps backwards and say, yes, it may be a training issue. Yes, it may be a capability issue. Yes, it may be a responsibility issue. But before all of that, it's potentially a design issue as well. And we need to acknowledge that our schools actually weren't designed for today's world, right? They were designed for yesterday's world. And as long as that continues to happen, we're going to continue playing like this blame game and shifting around responsibility because nobody actually knows how to fix it, right? And that's where I think we just need to back up and go to the drawing boards at the level of design. Now, to your question, right? I think that it would fundamentally change a lot. I think I would stop actually focusing on like how do I prepare kids for one set of examinations. I think I would start to focus on like what are the competencies, what are the skills, what do kids actually need to be able to succeed, right? I would hope that there is like some learning system that kids are able to go into afterwards where they're able to be able to actually continue to deepen their learning. Because I think college, when you get it right, can do a lot for kids, right? It can unlock minds, it can unlock hearts. Lots of kids discover themselves in those extra years. So I would hope there's a journey that kids can be able to go into. But I understand the heart of your question was, how would it change how we approach schooling? And I do think, yes, it would shift our intention, hopefully to one being much more purposeful.
And it's
Yeah.
also, to me, it also sounds like, when you ask a average school principal or a school leader, what does the world look like, 20 years later when your child gets into the workforce? It is so vague for the school principal or school leader to even understand what kind of world this child is going to inherit and what kind of world that this child needs to start thriving in, right? And if you just reduce that delay, like most system thinkers say, one of the best things we need to do is just reduce the delay, right? And if you reduce the delay to down to at the end of school, this is what's going to happen. It probably becomes easier for the teacher or the school principal to visualize
Yep.
in terms of, it's not a very moving target. It's something that they can focus on. And even better is if we can start thinking of how kids can survive, thrive, and succeed today, right now, in today's times.
Yeah.
Why should we wait?
Yeah. No, I mean, I love that. So, I mean, two thoughts come to mind. One is, Yuval Harari, right? The author of Sapiens, right? Like he put out this piece on how like just the world is changing so fast, right? And like technology has accelerated that, right? And I think it was like does technology favor tyranny? I think was the title of the article, right? But like in that, his main argument is that we're not able to predict how the world is changing,
Mhm.
right? And so actually maybe the biggest thing we need to be able to basically equip kids with is how do I actually learn the skill of really being able to reinvent myself frequently? And the underlying premise of that argument is that like a lot of the jobs that are available today are very likely to be obsolete 40, 50 years from now. And the truth is that they're likely to keep going obsolete every few decades, right? And so if you think about the generation and the workforce timeline of an individual, right? I'm working for maybe 40, 50 years plus, right? Over my lifespan. Within that, the likelihood that I'm entering a job that at some point will go obsolete is not low,
Hmm.
right? And so you have a choice. You either prepare kids for the set of skills that you think they're going to need and then basically understand that actually that's going to likely change 20 years down the line. Or you actually say, yes, I'm going to prepare you that, but more than that, I'm going to prepare you for how to frequently reinvent yourself,
Hmm.
how to be a lifelong learner. And so that in the event that that happens, you're not just stuck, actually how to regroup,
Hmm.
how to reinvent, how to relearn. And I think there's beauty in that.
This is beautiful because it's about making children super resourceful. It's about making children survivors. It's about
Yeah.
making children, we're telling them that things are going to change, man. And it's not a bad thing. And the fact that you really know how to reinvent yourself quickly allows you to stay ahead
Yeah.
of not others, but ahead of the change, so that you can then make a positive contribution to this world. You know what the feeling I'm getting right now,
Yeah.
if
Tell
I
me.
may share. The feeling that I'm getting right now is you believe, and please correct me. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
I'm just saying you believe that our schooling system is obsolete. across the world. I'm not talking about any specific country. You believe that our schooling system was built for a world that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
That's probably why you're building the circle.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because some of the theorists say that the way to change a system is not to continuously improve it by 1%, but to entirely build a new system that renders the present system obsolete,
Yeah.
right? It's not about little improvements within a already broken system. It's
Yeah.
about finding another system that solves this problem that makes this obsolete. Like we would never get into data if we were just trying to build slightly better SMS services,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean. So that is one thing. And the second thing, since you use the word design,
Yeah.
I start feeling that this thing that you're building in Circle, which I want to know more about, is so much opportunity for people who are coming in without all the already jaded, shaded experience of the present obsolete system. It's like people coming in with this incredible hope and opportunity to create change. Is my feeling anywhere there?
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of thoughts. I think one is, yes, we're building the circle partially because, we're rooted in this belief that, we need to figure out how to make sure schools are evolving
Mm.
and we need to reinvent this thing that we currently call school, right? We're also rooted in the belief that that's especially true for kids from low income backgrounds, right? Like if you look at the top, 25% in India, right? They're evolving and changing with the times, right? Schools are figuring out how to evolve. But when you look at the rest of India, the vast majority of India, right? Like that's just not happening. And so you have these two different worlds that are basically growing further and further apart. And we believe we need to basically figure out how to fix that, how to rectify that, right? For kids who actually really don't have any access to that evolution. And compounding that lack of evolution is also, just as we all know, like a fundamental breakdown in quality, right? And so we're trying to say, how do you marry both of these, right? How do you actually figure out how to get schools to evolve that are serving kids from low income backgrounds and couple that, right, with like this obsessive focus on high quality, right? Um, and the final thing that that we're rooted in at the circle is that you know schools as we know it, they were very much designed for a me world, right? Like if you look at what happens within schools, right? Like think about everything kids go through, right? How do I get better grades? How do I basically figure out how to achieve more? If you're really lucky, then how do I actually figure out how to find my individual purpose, right? Those are all embedded in what we know as school. And that's a very me approach, right? But when you look at the long list of problems that today's kids are inheriting, right? Pick an issue, right? Pick climate, right? Pick caste, pick gender, like pick an issue that kids are inheriting today that today's young people will actually grow up having to figure out how to solve. But if our schools aren't actually equipping kids to actually be able to solve those issues, then we're not going to get very far. And so what we're rooted at the circle is that we have to figure out how to shift this focus of school, which has largely been centered on me, to one that is me and we, right? And so a lot of those beliefs form a lot of how we actually, operate at the circle.
Mm.
We focus on new schools, right? To a lot of what you mentioned, right? And you said new energy. We focus on new schools. We do so mostly because like it is fundamentally more likely to be able to lead to success, to be able to get a new school off the ground, right? It is very, very hard to turn around a school that has been in existence for a long time, that has actually been, not seeing results. That does not mean that we believe we need to give up on those efforts, right? But we do believe that actually we need innovative proof points of success surrounding to be able to actually, try to give us a sense of what could be possible.
Someone told me India doesn't need new schools or more schools. They said India just needs better schools because there are just so many schools and the population growth is like at 1.8, which means we are at a degrowth, which means it's
Yeah.
going to get even more difficult to get children into schools. I wonder how that kind of plays into this whole story. But is it just so hard to transform a school, or is it as easy as changing the school leader?
Yeah. The data doesn't support it. right? Like
Oh.
there is a lot of data that actually shows that actually, less than 10% of school transformation efforts across the world are successful. And it's controversial, right? Every time I say it, it's controversial, but it's true, right? Like you talk to statisticians, you talk to basically, economists in education, you talk to researchers, right? Like there's been a lot of stuff tried over the years, right? It's why, like, in the United States right now, where they've put a lot of energy into being able to turn around existing schools, like, you know, most of those efforts have actually fallen short, right? And what, they've discovered is, that their starting ingredients actually for turning around a school are what you just said, right? When you can actually replace a school leader, you have a more likelihood of success. And when you can actually figure out how to have autonomy over, teachers, right? Hiring, being able to basically, have accountability in cases of low performance, right? The problem is, I think we're not there in India right now,
Okay.
right? A lot of these decisions are very, very hard to take right now. And so if you don't have some of those ingredients at your disposal, then what are you left with? You're
Mm.
left with capacity building. You're left with actually efforts that have you kind of cutting around the periphery.
Mm.
Maybe I can put into place this program, and this program will actually lead to a dramatic shift in
Mm.
outcomes. But the problem is those aren't actually showing much difference in outcomes, right? And if you look here in India at some of the research, right, take some of, Karthik Mullaidhan's research or others, right? Like they've done lots of research on actually school transformation efforts, and they found very similar results,
Mm.
right? And so I'm not actually saying that one, we need to basically figure out how to go and build a whole new set of schools on top of the 1.7 million schools that exist. But I do think, when you look at that 1.7 million, one is we have a lot of schools that are defunct, right? That are not operating out of that 1.7 million. The unfortunate reality of COVID is that COVID, unfortunately, shut down quite a few schools. Um, I do think we need to basically be chasing solutions that work. I think we need to actually be looking at what the data says.
Mm.
And I think when we start to be able to chase it, I think we start to basically end up with a set of solutions that I believe actually will help us move
Mm.
much faster.
Mm. This is really beautiful because it then creates opportunity for entrepreneurship because it creates. So you're saying school transformation doesn't work, which means
Say
I
it's
mean, I
very
mean, I
tough.
mean
Yeah,
wait,
it's very, very tough
it's
without a set of
difficult. It's
solutions
difficult.
that
It's
I don't know if we have the political tenability to take in right now.
correct,
Yeah.
which means the success rate, at least in the US, from what the data is showing, is like 10%.
And in India, it's also less than 10%, right? From
Really?
some of the data that's come out. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Okay. So which means that most schools may continue to remain
yeah.
the same, right?
Yeah.
And although there may be efforts to make change happen, that change may not be visible.
Yeah.
One thing I want to I want to kind of think about is do parents really want change? And the reason I'm asking this question is because if parents are the chief sponsors of, let's say, a private education, okay, I'm only talking about private education.
Yeah. Of course.
And if they don't see change happening, or if they don't want change, then how does that motivate, let's say, a school leader to make change happen? The first thing. Second question is, I was listening to a little 2-minute talk that Barack Obama made a couple of days ago. And he said the reason he lost the election was because he was talking about something that he wanted to talk about without understanding where the people were.
Yeah.
So where are our people? Do they feel that every school, like there was a time when I thought every chartered accountant is a chartered accountant. There was a time I felt like all ice creams are ice cream. There was a time when I felt like the only cheese available in the world is Amul cheese. There was a time when I felt like all butter is salted and all Chinese
Yeah.
is Indian Chinese.
Yeah.
Right? If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
does a parent actually know that there's a difference between school, and school?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a two things. One is to go back to your earlier piece, right? Like, I do think that, like, in order for us to be able to, to be able to create change within existing schools, we need a new set of conditions. And I don't think that we have those conditions in place in India. And I think they're going to take us a long time to be able to get. And I think we need to be fighting for those conditions, right? Like, how do I actually have, as a principal, autonomy over my staffing decisions, right? How do I, as a principal, be able to basically spend the vast majority of my time on instructional decisions, right? How do I, as a principal, be able to actually spend the vast majority of my time overseeing quality of what is working and what is not working within my schools? But when you talk to most principals in India, they don't have a lot of those pieces, right? And how do I, as a system, be able to also have the same, set of conditions available for principals as well? I think that until we're able to get some of those things, I think what we're doing is we're cutting around the periphery and we're not actually cutting to the core of what it takes to be able to turn around a school. Right.
Mm.
And so I don't say that, turning around a school is impossible, but right now, I don't think the conversation in India is how do we get those conditions in place? I think the conversation is those conditions are too hard to get in place. So let's cut around the periphery and let's do all of the other things when actually those things show not a lot of evidence of being able to work. Right. And I think as a result, we're spending an enormous amount of money in things that actually aren't going to shift the core of what kids actually need. Right. So that's a bit of my take on that. Right.
Mm.
I think you know, parents, I think parents want what's best for their kids, right? Like, I think that's the bottom line. I have yet to meet a parent to this day, right? That like doesn't just want what's fundamentally best for their kids, right? It's like, it's a law of nature, right? And I think that no parent wants their child to be a guinea pig, right? Like no parent wants their child to basically be to be in a classroom where somebody's experimenting and they're like, I don't know which way this is going to go. Right. So I think that we as educators have a responsibility to be able to basically help parents understand like how the world is changing, how the workforce is changing. And, also, but we have to understand that ourselves, right? That the workforce is changing in ways. And by actually leaning into that, this is an experimentation. This is a necessary evolution to basically ensure that kids keep up and kids succeed. Right.
Mm.
And I think we have to figure out how to bring parents along in that journey.
Mm. I think that's really beautiful. The fact that we know that parents want the best for their kids. And when parents see that their children have experienced something different and the outcomes in them become visible, and they start seeing that those outcomes are different from the reference group around them in terms of society, that's when they probably start feeling that something different is happening. And in many discussions with school leaders and parents that I've had, parents have said, something's different in my child. After the school, I don't know what you're doing. I don't want you to change.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of brings me to think about this one experience that stayed with me in one of the Inspire Eds that
Yeah.
Teach for India used to really
Yeah.
run, and I really want them to start that again.
Yeah.
They need
Yeah.
they need to do more of that. But in the American School of Bombay, once I remember Howard Gardner, the professor, came in and he said one thing. He said, this was about 7, 8 years ago. He said, the poor require literacy education. The middle income group require engagement.
Yeah.
And the higher income group require value education. And it really stayed with me for a long time. It almost felt like, is that like a strategy? Is that like an orientation for each school to be focused on? Now, I may have misunderstood that statement,
Yeah.
or I may be remembering it in a different way.
Yeah.
But I also understand that may have been true at that point in time.
Yeah.
How does that align today?
Yeah. With all due respect to that.
With all due respect.
With all due respect to
With
that
all-
professor, because I don't know this professor. I mean, I would disagree with at multiple levels. I mean, I think that actually that's part of what the circle is founded on, right? Is that we've basically over time segregated what we think kids from different, economic backgrounds need. And I think I find that wrong.
Does that go against equity or belief? Like,
I think both, right? I think like as long as we continue to segregate what we believe kids from different economic backgrounds need, I think that like, we're going to continue to basically have multiple Indias that exist, right? And we're going to continue to have basically, a set of kids that come from more affluent backgrounds being able to race much further ahead. And we're always going to continue to have, another set of kids that basically are, just much further behind. And that's because by design, we have said, here's what you need and here's what you need. And I think what we need to be able to sit down is actually, I believe that, kids from low income backgrounds, all of what you just mentioned, right? They need all three of those. But I think that's an issue of time, right? And so I think what a lot of like the evidence points us to is that like to be able to basically provide a education that is holistic, that is rooted in values and basically helping kids, get the basics, right? Literacy, foundational numeracy, all of those elements. You just need a lot of time with kids, right? Which I think is where like a lot of policy decisions today, start as early as you can, right? Like with kids, right? But be able to also make sure that you have longer school days with kids to be able to actually provide kids all that we know that kids need and deserve to succeed and to thrive in this today's.
But something you said
Yeah,
just almost brought a tear to my eye because
yeah,
it just made me feel really, really bad.
yeah,
And what I heard was, I don't have a chance.
yeah,
I almost heard that no matter how hard I try,
yeah.
there is a design
I was working
that
against me.
has written my destiny. And
Yeah,
if the data proves that
yeah,
or even shows that's happening,
yeah,
for me that's really heartbreaking because a society is probably known by the way it treats the least of its members.
yeah,
And if we by design institutionalize rich becoming richer and poor getting poorer and
yeah,
creating these multiple Indias, I thought this India 1 and India 2 and India 3 is all only for FMCG products and companies like, Flipkart and
yeah,
Amazon and things like that. But
yeah,
if that really exists the way you're saying, like if I'm thinking about the maids or the drivers who drive their employers' kids to an expensive school,
yeah,
and then when they send their kid to another school, knowing that this is not going to work, I don't know how that, like, it takes away hope.
yeah. I don't think that this is a breakdown in, you know, fundamental intention. I don't think that people basically are saying like, hey, we want, multiple things. I think part of it is, people are saying, I don't know how to actually provide this with, this amount of resources to kids from low income backgrounds. But I do think at the heart of it, we need to go back. And I think we need to ask what was the purpose at which schools were designed in the first place? And can we start to question that design, right? Were schools designed to be vehicles of economic mobility for kids, or were they designed to maintain the status quo, right? And I would argue it's the latter, right? And I would argue that was a design decision that was taken some 70, 80 years ago, right? If I enter into a school highly affluent, I will likely leave highly affluent. School will not change that. But you could also argue if I enter into a school not affluent, will school actually help me to be able to shift that? I don't think that schools were designed to be able to shift that. And I think we need to go back and question that design decision. And I think when we can question that, I think our allocation of resources, I think our intention, I think how we design and then how we implement eventually will start to shift in some pretty fundamental ways.
Yeah. I mean, just hearing you, it suddenly to me shows how big that problem is.
Yeah.
And it also, to a certain extent, also gives me hope because I feel like if someone with an entrepreneurial mindset and zest
Yeah.
comes in and says, this is not right. Like in Calcutta, chalbe na, this is
Yeah.
not something I want to do. And I'm not going to wait for someone else to clean this system. I'm going to do what I can do in my power to make that change happen. And even if that means set up an after school, do something that can go ahead and fill in the gaps, right? Fill in the blanks for these kids and show that it's really working. I think that really has incredible potential. So who are the kind of people who are coming to the well, let me reframe that question. Who are the kind of people who should be coming to the to the circle? And for whom is the circle designed for, created for? Who is circle thriving to incubate?
Yeah. May I build on something you previously said before I answer that?
Yes,
I
please.
think that very much agree with that. And I think that, look, I think the path of being able to change this for all of India, whenever people talk about India, it's very overwhelming, which I think is what our population is so large, right? There's such a diversity. We're not talking about 15 or 20% of the population that's in need of this. We're talking, 70, 75% plus, right? You're talking about, the largest share of young people in the world as we know it today, right? And about 300 million plus kids, right? Like, I mean, the numbers are just staggering, right? But I think it starts by us being able to invest in this, multitude of proof points across the country that are able to show that something is fundamentally possible, right? Something different is fundamentally possible for kids. And I think when we can actually start to get those proof points and do that, I think that has the potential to have a multiplier effect that is not linear, right? That is catalytic. I think when we can actually invest in those proof points that are able to do that, like I think we can actually, get parents to demand an education that is fundamentally different, and I think that there's a lot of potential in that. To your question on the circle, um, I think that we don't have an archetype that we are looking for. So we don't have this like, here is what you have to have done before you actually come to the circle, this set of experiences that you have to have, right? We are looking for people that are, committed to actually, you know, changing the education system, people that believe that schools hold enormous power and potential, right? We're looking for people that, want to reinvent. We're looking for people also that have the gumption and the commitment to stick it out because, you know, it can be fun and it can be highly creative, but all of us who've worked in schools also know that it's also just tough and it takes time, right? And so we're looking for people that, have all of that. And there is not, a certain age definition or a certain experience definition, right? We're open to all of that, but we're looking for people with that set of competencies and orientations that can actually start to drive change.
And then once they come into the circle, what happens to them? Like, what are you doing to them that empowers them to go out and enable all these things?
Yeah, so we run a few big programs, right? But one of our our core is the incubation, right? We have two core big programs, and one of them is the incubation. And what we do is we actually go on a journey with entrepreneurs who want to start new schools or new after school programs for kids coming from low income backgrounds, right? And we, look for entrepreneurs, right, who have that set of competencies, that set of orientations. And, once we actually, have them on board, then essentially what we do is we commit to walking the walk with you until you get that school up and running or that after school program up and running. And then, as you get it running really well. And so we run an 18-month incubation, right? Where we will actually teach entrepreneurs how to do three big things. One is how do you design a highly effective school or after school program? How do you launch it and get it off the ground? And how do you then run it really well, right? And those 18 months actually include a whole suite of things, right? We're doing 5 days of workshopping every single month, right? So we're actually coming together in person pretty much every month for your first 9 or 10 months. And then after that, it goes down to every 3 months. You're working with a coach. And the coach is actually somebody who has started a school or an after school program of their own, right? And that person is spending time with you every single week, right? You're visiting schools and institutions across the country, right? We're visiting a lot of schools that are known for innovation, that are known for being really high in quality. And we're also visiting some that sometimes don't end up being that way. And there's learning in both of those, right? Because no school today didn't start with an excellent vision, right? All schools start with a really high intention and then stuff happens over time. And, we're doing all of that on this learning journey to say, can I get exposed to what's out there? Can I learn actually how to design a highly effective, more innovative school? Can I learn how to get it off the ground? And then eventually, can I learn how to run it really well? As you're about 6 or 7 months in, you start to pilot. And we say, actually start working with kids now, right? You've got a design in place. And you start to iterate as you start to work with small amounts of children, right? And eventually, those small amounts of kids lead to more kids. And that leads to more kids. And the hope and the intention is that, you've piloted so many times that at the end of 18 months, when it's time for a launch, it's not like this big grand event. It's actually, I'm going to take the next logical step now. And our goal is to basically try and walk that walk with you. You are always in the driver's seat, but we are walking that walk with you until you're eventually able to get this off the ground. And then once you launch, well, you're a part of this network, right? Where you have autonomy, you have agency, and you are actually running this on your own. But you're surrounded by other people who are doing the same thing. You're surrounded by a community of people that is growing over time. And you're also surrounded by this infrastructure of support that's trying to help you and is rooting for you to succeed over time. We have entrepreneurs, coming from across India right now. We have, entrepreneurs started an after school program in Pune working with kids. We have a nature-based program coming up in Bangalore, right? We have, a school coming up in Jalalabad, right, that aspires to be a high quality institution for kids that desperately need it. We have a chain of, low budget private schools coming up outside of Kanpur, right? We have, a program that's actually focused on filmmaking and actually how do you use filmmaking and producing films together with kids, as a means to be able to actually transform the lives of kids. We have an after school program that's focused on actually, figuring out how to equip kids with better understanding their legal rights and the law so that they can actually have higher amounts of agency and choice. Because if they know how to actually navigate the law, they'll be able to actually navigate so much, building off of a conversation you and I were having earlier. All of those entrepreneurs are coming in, but we believe actually we can build a network of those over time that are better serving kids from across India. In the process, we're trying to reinvent this thing that we call school.
This is incredible. The reason is because if there's anyone out there who has an idea or feels that I wish children were taught this in school today. I wish that children knew this. I feel children need to know this in school, and school is not doing that. Right? Anyone with an idea like that, with a will, with a mindset to make change happen, can benefit from the circle today.
Yeah, I would add a little bit to like that equation that you like. It's do I have the will, the gumption, the commitment, right? The vision. Couple that with, have I been deeply rooted in kids and communities, and have I been able to take their voice into account? Building off of our earlier conversation on parents, like, am I able to basically lean into this and say, here's what kids need, and I'm actually building something that I believe kids and parents are also telling me that they need, right? Because an innovation that basically just happens in a silo without actually bringing kids and parents along will eventually have no one coming to it, And so we actually believe that both of those go hand in hand, right? It's my individual inclination, will, and commitment coupled with what am I learning kids and parents really want and need. And when I can marry those two, then I have an innovation that's much more likely to succeed. I have a school, a program that's actually much more likely to thrive.
I think a lot of people don't realize the value and importance of that experience being close to the community. I just want to share one personal experience. When I was part of the ISLI, the second cohort, day one in Pune, they said, tonight you're going to be sleeping in a basti.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where is it? It's like, it's a basti. It's an area. Okay, whose house? I don't know. You figure it out. And I spent the night there. And to this day, I have like 4K resolution quality remembrance of that experience that I had, that family, the house next door, and the guy who was making little wooden toys, and the family, and how they shared their food with me. And, it was just such an incredible experience. At times when things get really hard, I just have to close my eyes and experience that to just refocus and to come back to find your North Star, So in that sense, I really love the fact that you're getting people rooted into the community, into the users, into the real beneficiaries. And that, I think, is going to be most powerful.
Yeah. One of our fundamental commitments at the Circle is a commitment to community, right? And it's building based just off of that, right? It's the belief that proximity is everything, right? Proximity is power. Proximity is, it's the roots in which we basically can build this off of. And I think when we actually choose to be proximate, right, to kids, to communities, to the people that we serve and the people that we're working with, like, we actually design solutions that are much more rooted, that are much more effective, right? It's when we stop being proximate, though, that, we start to basically sit, in ivory towers and design things that actually like just aren't relevant anymore. And so proximity is everything. But I think what happens whenever you actually lean into really genuine proximity is I think it stops being looked at, well, I'm designing this for you. And actually, wait a minute, like, we're going to design this together. And then I think, all of these issues like, oh my gosh, it's the parents are, not resistant to change, or, actually like, I don't know how to actually design for this. It actually becomes a we problem again, instead of a me problem. And you start to be able to basically lead together. And there's enormous power in that.
I feel this is such a gift for an education entrepreneur today, because just from if I have to use entrepreneurial language, then 70%, it's a big market. If you look at the total
Yeah.
addressable market, it's huge. If
Yeah.
you were to try and start your own education after school sort of startup, in a way of speaking, and I'm using certain words which may not necessarily be aligned to the circle's vision, but just so
That's
that
okay. Yeah.
people who listen to us who might be looking at, an entrepreneurial
Yeah.
way of mind, there's a big addressable market. There's a humongous need. Society needs it. Society needs you to take charge. Society needs that one person who's challenging the status quo. But we also have all the data to show that 99% of startups, or maybe more than that, fail because the founders fatigue, because the investors who invest in it don't allow them to take if they gave them 100 rupees, they take two bets of 50 rupees as opposed to 50 bets of 2 rupees, you
Yeah.
know. And all these things start becoming really difficult, or the founder is not able to pivot his business model because he's already created a
Yeah.
particular story or thesis and got that funding, and now is not able to kind of pivot, so he's kind of just leave it and go. But when I look at all these things put together, having a circle, not a line, but a circle, right? Having a circle, seeing other people also work on similar lines in similar environments and even succeeding, or at least attempting to succeed, gives that entrepreneur a little more mileage, I think. The second thing I think is what could work with other people could also work here. Whereas the systems and many of the systems, the thinking, the design language, all that could work all across. And what entrepreneurs fail to realize is that social capital, intellectual capital, all these things are very, very difficult to find as an entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs, when they start, they don't even have accountants because they say, hey, why do you want to bother paying tax? You learn to run your business. At least first make money. These are first world problems. And I've actually experienced things like these. There's
Yeah.
no one's coming there and telling them how to make this work. So I really feel like the probability of success
Yeah.
dramatically improves.
Yeah.
And we want success to happen where it matters the most for the community,
Yeah.
not just anything,
Yeah.
right? But we want success to happen. That's the feeling I get. And that's why I'm really so thrilled
Yeah.
to hear about the circle, because this is actually
Yeah.
a runway for people to be able to set the sail right to ensure that they're creating value, tremendous value
Yeah.
to community.
Yeah. I mean, while the language was different, like
Yes.
I think the premise was spot on, and I think, look, I mean, as I've been in education over the last, count my time teaching plus this whatever 17 years, right? Like I think that, I've been talking to people all the time, right? That are like, yeah, I'd love to start a school. I'd love to start an after school program, but I'll do that 10, 15, 20 years down the line. Right. And I was trying to scratch my head over time. I was like, well, everybody like believes that school holds enormous power. A lot of people believe that school holds enormous power, but people are really scared to take the jump. Right. And it's not that, many of these people weren't doing incredible, very complex, hard rules in what they're currently doing. I was like, well, wait a minute, you're leading institutions right now, or you're playing really senior roles in, organizations which are complex. And why do you think you can't do this? And when we unpacked that, it was because like starting a school in India is like this big like black box, right? People are like, I don't know what's going to emerge, and I don't, there's no, and so what we're trying to say is actually, can we come in to be able to basically help it be a little bit less mysterious? And to say, actually, what we will do, and I don't, no way have we like cracked that, but what we will do is we will walk the walk with you to try to crack it together, right? So that it actually basically takes like a little bit less of this like superhero courage to be able to actually take that jump, right? And so very much yes, but also exactly what you said, right? Which is that like it's tough, right? Like you're climbing lots of different mountains, and there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. And so can we be able to surround you with an ecosystem of support that starts with you, but actually stays with you for a lifetime, right? Just actually, we will do what we can to be able to actually walk with you over time so that you have this learning infrastructure. And it's not just the circle, you have the wider circle. You have other entrepreneurs, you have, people who are actually, doing something similar. And then you start to realize, well, wait a minute, like I'm not doing this alone. There are other people that are out there that are actually trying to fight for something similar. And I think there's power.
Absolutely. And one thing that comes to my mind as I listen to you about the potential benefit of people joining the circle is, and please correct me,
Yeah, of course.
if I take it off in a different direction. But just thinking as a school leader today, okay, what do why is it so hard to transform schools? And one of the opinions, my personal opinions,
Please.
is because of 5 or 6 things. A school leader has zero training in being a school leader. She's almost a head teacher, and most of the time through superiority or through seniority.
Yep.
Okay. Not necessarily through anything else. The second problem that I've noticed is a school leader knows nothing, well, strong statement, but needs to know more about quality management systems.
Yep.
Because you're dealing with service quality. You're not dealing with product quality.
Very true.
So the specifications, the error rates, the way things are, QC.
Your inputs are humans, your outcomes are humans.
Exactly, right? I look at this cup and I can say, okay, QC passed on so-and-so date. There's no QC passed.
Yeah.
Right? So you got to understand, how do you measure systems?
Yeah.
Where services come into play. So you got to understand Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, all these things about systems and processes.
Yeah.
The next one is you need to kind of understand, how do you lead and motivate and influence people, which means you need to be trained in all kinds of things in psychology, like REBT, CBT, you name it, right? Hypnotherapy, hypnotize people if you have to get them to do what is right. So that suddenly is an area that most of them really have no training in. It doesn't feature in any of the training programs anywhere.
Yeah.
The fourth angle is really like strong, like you have one school leader across 4 pedagogical focuses, like a pre-primary focus, which kids are trying to learn to read, and later in middle school, and then high school is exam testing and exam training.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth angle is they have no idea about marketing, branding, communicating, building agency, creating advocacy inside a community. So you may have this incredible thing happening inside a building that nobody knows, and everyone else who looks at it would probably say, hey, they're crazy. They're just experimenting. They're not naturally and logically evolving. I love the way you reframed that to go from experimentation to needed evolution.
Yeah.
I think that is perfect. And that is something that I would always talk about. Hey, we are an experimental school. And now I realize how dangerous that could possibly be, because no one wants to experiment with their own kids, right? They want something that's surefire going to work. Yeah. So most school leaders do not know how to market, how to communicate, how to build advocacy, and certainly no clue on building communities.
Yeah.
They have no idea on how to build a community, what goes into building community, what creates tipping points, what creates, this massive surge of networks of people who are combined together, who come together with this one common purpose.
Yeah.
So now when you have all these things going on, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
Right? To transform a school. And that's where I see what Circle's doing is a massive gift. And this is just my opinion. Okay. Yeah. I feel that the more people that come into Circle and understand schools from an outside in perspective, understand the different things that go in, all the wheels that go around to making this thing turn, I think then they can get into so many of these dead schools, defunct schools that are on the road to shutting down, schools that are trying to make change happen, but are absolutely overloaded with just one resource, one asset on the ground. Which means now schools will look for consultants, will look for friends of schools, who would want to come in and really make a difference. I think Circle can play a huge role there, a massive role there. Yeah. Because while 10 years ago, no school wanted to invest in teacher training or development, today I think people are more open to training, development, and learning, and having consultants come in.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? You think I'm absolutely off, or?
Yeah. 3 big thoughts. I mean, one is time is what I would add to the 5 things that you mentioned. I love the 5 things that you mentioned,
Okay.
And I think that where principals and school leaders spend their time matters, right? And am I able to spend the majority of my time coaching teachers, right? Thinking about instruction, thinking about, the bottom line of our kids learning. And am I able to pull the right levers that are leading to that, right? And I think that most school leaders, unfortunately, answer, no to that question. And I think we need to be able to shift that because I can do all the things in the world, but if I'm not able to actually spend time where I know strategically time needs to be spent to shift outcomes for kids, and it's just not going to get there, right? Time in a way is linear, unfortunately, right? And so I need to basically figure out how to lean into that, right? So that would be one. Um, I think second is you know, yes, I think that there is, you know, if we can actually focus on a lot of the elements that you mentioned, right? And add time into that, I think we have a bit of a recipe for success that starts to be able to build up. Um, I think that we believe that reinvention holds enormous power. Um, and you mentioned the experimental element, right? Like I agree with that, right? I think that a lot of people ask us, are you building alternative schools? And I take issue with that word a little bit, right? Because I'm like, well, then what you're arguing is that we're building these schools that are, you're trying to build schools that are offbeat, that are a little bit off the path. But actually, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say the mainstream needs to evolve, right? This is a necessary evolution. And so I think that what we're trying to build is, schools that actually evolve our mainstream, that basically figure out how to bring our mainstream into the 21st century. And it's not one out of just want or desire. It's one out of if our schools don't evolve, not only will they go obsolete, the kids that they're serving risk going obsolete. And we think that that is not that holds a lot of danger for the future of India. It also holds a lot of danger for the 1.4 billion lives that are basically dependent on that. And so we see this as a necessary evolution that, has a moral rooting, has a social rooting, but also has an economic rooting for the future of the country. Right. And so we over time, I think just that brings us to our second core program. We over time, I've had lots of educators approach us to say, I don't want to start a school. And we realize, that, a small percentage of people actually want to start schools. And so we've had a lot of people that say, look, I want to reinvent, but I want to do this within my own classroom. And I want to evolve, and I want to figure this within my own school. And so we launched labs about a year and a half ago with the intention of saying, actually, can we figure out how to get those same tools of reinvention into the hands of educators that really want to drive change? And so through our work with labs, we run, 5-week programs, we run 3-month programs, we run, workshops and forums, all open to educators who are saying, I really want to get a vision for what this could look like. I want to be able to start to get my hands on some of the tools of what this could look like, with the intention of could we actually start to build a sea of proof points across the country that are actually, working towards reinvention with kids who need it the most. So.
Something tells me we could go on for 2 hours. And is there anything that you'd like to share or say or amplify before we bring this conversation to a close?
No, I mean, I think it's been fun talking, and yeah, thank you so much for taking out the time, and yeah, it's gratitude, I think, for all the work that you guys are doing as well. I think there's just an urgent need for it, Yeah.
Thank you so much. So everyone who's listening to us, you could go to LinkedIn, look up Sandeep Rai, Rai, and you could follow him. He puts a lot of amazing posts. He's very open to sharing. If you're looking for inspiration, if you're looking for motivation on getting your education dreams off the ground, I think this is an organization that you should really be following. You should also look at The Circle on Instagram. I think they share a lot on Instagram, and they put up a lot of their videos, webinar videos and workshop videos. A lot of it is available on The Circle YouTube page, so please go look it up. It's The Circle, TheCircle. On a closing note, I just wanted to share that I was at a TED Talk recently, and a gentleman there said, who was advocating local languages. He was saying that the way to eradicate a community completely is to kill the language.
Yeah.
And that really, really shook me.
Yeah.
And something that you said today was as monumentally significant.
Yeah.
What I heard you say was, if we don't get our plan A school really doing well, then our kids are at risk. So we need to absolutely get our plan A right. We don't need a plan B or a plan C. We need to get this act right. And we can,
Yeah.
because parents need it. And there is the circle and other people like the circle who are out there, you know, just waiting for people to come and challenge that status quo. And then you'll give them all the courage and all the systems that they require to go out and get that happening.
Yeah. If I can just add two things really fast to that. I mean, one is, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think I would also argue, like, you know, one of the biggest things that, you can starve a community of is to eradicate hope as well, you know? And I think that when you go into communities that have, endured suffering for long periods of time, endured high levels of poverty for long periods of time, I think, what I've discovered over and over again is like people's ability to be able to basically look into suffering and to be able to basically say, yes, this has been my situation for a while, but I still hope for a better India. I still dream for a better tomorrow. I still hope for a better future. Like there's enormous power in that because that hope drives will, that will drives change, that change drives commitment, and that leads to basically, a new destiny. But when people lose that hope, I think in the absence of that, right? Like it's dangerous, right? And so a lot of what we believe proof points hold the power to do, schools, programs, is to be able to instill hope. If I'm a parent and I see a school down the street that's actually giving children an excellent education, I'm able to be able to stand up and say, hey, my kids deserve that too. Right. And that's hope, right? That's being able to look around and say, like, I know it's happening elsewhere. Even if my child's not getting it around it, I want to demand this for my child right now. Right. And so a large part of what we need to do is to be able to say, how do you change what people believe? Right. And that has the potential to be able to change the conversation, right? Because when you can change what people believe, you create this enormous, momentum of will that is unstoppable. And then finally, look, I mean, people can visit us at, thecircleindia.org, right? Our applications for our incubation are going to be opening in January of 2024. For people that are interested in starting schools or starting after school programs, like please do go check out our applications. And if people are not wanting to start a school, but you're just wanting to get your feet wet with us, right? And like, we just want to basically, get some of the tools of reinvention, right? We have all sorts of programs that are open. We're always posting on Instagram and on LinkedIn and on our website at thecircleindia.org. You can spend a few hours with us, one evening just to be able to get your feet a little bit wet.
Thank you so much, Sandeep.
Thank you as well. Yeah.